Again, this is a D&I Lab Talk hosted by Diversity Factor. We do this potentially 2 times a year, where we bring in an expert on a certain subject that our members of our D&I Lab wish to know more about. And just so you know, Diversity Factor's D&I Lab is a gathering network of D&I professionals sitting in different places in Danish business life. And we talk about serious or various topics throughout a year connected to D&I. And one of those topics that they have been really, really imminent to know something about is the social factors in the ESGs. So that is why we invited Anne Hørsted from Improved Business onto this call to tell us more about the social factors. And Anne, I think this is just the perfect starting point to just say hi to you, because I'm hitting admit while we go. But let's hear from you instead of me just talking. So Anne, please present yourself and welcome to the D&I Lab Talk.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to coming here and talk a little bit about the social dimension of ESG. Everybody is talking about it, but not many people understand it yet. And the social factors is also a little bit in the shadow of the E in the ESG. So I'm hoping a lot of people will join in, and more is coming. I have a small presentation I would like to show, and then we'll just go right on to discussing the social dimension in the ESG.
Yes, exactly. So that is the program for the next hour. Again, if you do have any questions coming up throughout the session, I will monitor the chat function. So please do type in your question in the chat, and I will make sure that Anne gets it because she's the expert. We're going to hear from her. So I'm monitoring. She's talking primarily. So if you have anything you want to ask, just put it in the chat. And again, for those of you who just came on, we are recording. I think everybody knows this, but I'm just consent and GDPR. I'm just saying it for sake of good order. And if those of you who always also been on a D&I Lab Talk before, you know that this is a conversation where the learning comes out of that actual conversation. So again, use Anne as your expert here because she knows everything there is to know about this. I just said that. I know you don't know everything, Anne, but tell me what it is that you do know about social factors in the ESG. So feel free to start presenting and do your show.
Yes, and I will definitely let you know if I don't know anything about it. So, yeah.
That's a good start.
I will just start by sharing my screen and my presentation.
Yeah.
And then I hope it works. Can you see it now?
I see it. If somebody can't see it, write it in the chat and let me know if you can't see it. But right now I'm seeing it. So hopefully all is good.
Perfectly. And you will just interrupt because I cannot see anything except my presentation. So please let me know.
Yeah.
But just to introduce myself a little bit more, my name is Anne, and I am the founder and the CEO of Improved Business. Improved Business is a fast-growing startup. I established the company in June 22, so it's very young. But we started with a clear mission. We wanted to rethink the usual way of doing business. We are giving small companies advice and counseling according to sustainability changes. We are a consulting firm, so we are trying to help this development by going in, talking to leaders and making everything a little bit more low practical in how you are working with the ESG. Our customers is mostly SMEs. It's also the public sector and universities in Denmark. That's why I have this little illustration with me. We are mostly in Denmark, so we are not global yet, but maybe we will be. We are growing very fast.
Fingers crossed.
Yes. We are now here in Copenhagen, but we're also in Odense and in Aalborg. I have 6 employees, 1 student and 5 freelance workers with me, and we are still growing the team. So this is just the illustrations. But what is the purpose with all this ESG? What is it all about? The ESG is about environment, social, and the governance. And they are interconnected and mutually dependent on each other. So therefore, you cannot be working with one separately. As I told you earlier, the social dimension is always, or is often standing in the shadow of the environment. A lot of the companies know that they have to work on their CO2 emissions. The essence in ESG is about evaluating how companies perform in these three areas and how to integrate environmental, social, and governance consideration into their overall business strategy. And that is what we are helping them with, making it into an overall business strategy. The goal is to encourage responsible and sustainable business practices, which in turn can have a positive impact on society and environment, while often improving companies' long-term financial performance and reducing risks. But it's not easy. Many companies are working with a lot of dilemmas. Sometimes companies have to expand operation and want to create more jobs. It's a good social goal in ESG, but it can also lead to more increased emissions, CO2 emissions, which is an environmental goal. So sometimes there is these dilemmas, and I've tried to write some of them here on my slide. The main focus on this one is that navigating is these dilemmas. You have to always consider the trade-offs and prioritize goals, making it into a strategy that that helps you run a successful business, even though you're working with all three ESG dimensions. To try to make it as easy as possible, I have taken this well-established framework from the E, where you take all the emission factors and combine them up in scopes. I've taken the same scopes thoughts onto the social dimension. So I tried to see what's in the company, it's scope 1, what is in the community, it's scope 2, and taking the same thoughts at upstream and downstream in scope 3. How is it having an effect on your customers, and how is it having an effect on all of the supply chain you're working with as a company? A lot of the big companies have to do it because of law and regulations, but it's the same for the SMEs. They are part of the value chain, but most of them just don't know it yet. This was just a very, very short presentation of improved business, because the whole setup with this talk is to get into the big dilemmas, the questions that we have prepared, but also hearing from you. So I'll just take down my screen here. So this was just a small presentation of improved business.
Thank you, Anne, for that. Okay. That sounds really, really hard in some shape or form, because you just presented the dilemma that, yeah, you can try to improve your workforce, but then you increase your CO2 emissions potentially. But so before we get into the really, really hard part about this and the complexity of it, can you elaborate a bit more about what is the social factors actually? Because I think a lot of companies, especially here in Denmark, they have a pretty good grasp of the environmental factors. We have been reporting on that for 20 years. We're also pretty good on that whole governance side of it. We have good governance protocols here in Denmark also, and so forth. So what is actually social factors?
Yes, and the new thing about the social factors, there's a microphone. Yeah. Turn it off.
I'm muting Ole. I'm muted.
Yes, the social factors, or the social part of the ESG, is about, as I've tried to illustrate in the scope model, it's about everything that has to do with your own employees in the company. It has to do with diversity, it has to do with the social responsibilities, it has to do with the work-life balance, it has to do with all of the stuff is within your own company. And then it has to do with how you affect your community. How are you contributing to the community around your company? And then you also have to take responsibility for your upstream, for your customers, and for your value chain, how they work with diversity, human rights, how their social responsibility, how they are acting with the social responsibilities, and how can they document it? And that's the big question now. How can we document the S part of the ESG?
Okay, now you can probably everybody could see me on screen going like, what? Because I think I knew the part, yes, the internal workforce, how do we work with that, diversity initiatives, LTI frequencies, well-being, and so forth, and the legislation going around that, and yes, the community in which we operate, and so forth, how we're sourcing from that community. But then you talked about the upstream part of the value chain, the customers.
Yes.
How can a company take responsibility for its customers and their work with social factors?
It's about that the customers know how you are working with your social factors. It's how the customers use your products. If you use something in other companies, if you're working with B2B. So there's a lot of factors in that is very new for companies to relate to. So it's very new, this part of social factors to work with, because everybody is looking internally, but not in the whole value chain and not for your customers.
That is
also,
sorry?
Sorry, but you also need to make it available for your customers to have the right channels to complain, to ask to all your social factors in your company, because people are interested in it. And if you're having a good ESG report, then people can ask how are you working with this, and what is crucial and essential for you as a company. What are your core values that you want to distribute to your customers?
Now, when we look at the ESGs, right now, some of it is legal requirements coming out, for example, from Copenhagen Parliament or the Danish Parliament, or especially from Brussels. But a lot of it is also voluntarily. Is that correctly understood? AKA, you don't have to do everything, you just have to do some of it.
Yeah, but because you're part of the value chain, then your social work is also going up to your big customers and is a part of their documentation of how they're working with it. So you're a part of the big company's value chain. Yeah. And if you look for the SMEs in Denmark, not many SMEs in Denmark are not working with big companies. No. We are all connected to each other, so it will hit everybody. Yeah. It is just a matter of time.
Yeah. We sometimes talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion work here in Diversity Factor. One thing is that it's the right thing to do, to try to eradicate the social injustice and so forth. However, also being frank, that is not always an argument that wins with C-level. That is something we also discuss in the D&I Lab. But one of the things that I think everybody can understand is that you lose momentum and you lose competitive advantage as a business if you don't regulate yourself before being regulated by others. And what you're basically saying here is that the ESGs, especially also if we just look at social factors, is working as a regulating or a regulator mechanism between companies in order to drive this forward.
Yes. Yeah. But a lot of companies right now don't understand quite how they should work with this. Nope. And it makes a lot of confusion. So a lot of companies is also saying, we don't do anything unless we have to. But many companies don't know that that is too late, because these changes we have to make, you cannot just fix them overnight. It's a long-term decision making for making a change in the whole company. Many places it's a culture change you have to make.
Yeah. If you look at the Danish landscapes, let's just look at Denmark. Where are we right now? How far progressed are we? When one thing is working with the E and the G. I think we're fairly good on that. No, okay. So talk me through it. Where are we overall on the ESGs and especially the social factors, if we look at the Danish business environment?
This is just my opinion and my experience, but the companies I work with are far behind. Yeah. The large companies in Denmark are having very good strategies. A lot of them want to be net zero by 2050. They have a lot of nice paperwork done, but making it happen and giving the supply chain the right possibilities to work with them, we are far behind. And I think that's the big problem right now, that the big companies are working with their own strategy without taking into notice that the value chain has to follow them and has to have some clear guidance on how they can support the big companies who has to make these documentations right now. So it's just dropping down and nobody knows what to do with it and how to do it. So it's very complex, and a lot of people just say, no, let's put aside. We have enough to do with our daily business in the companies. A lot of companies struggle with, they have a lot of people they cannot recruit. They are having a lot of problems with the financials right now. So ESG is not a popular thing to come and talk about right now.
I remember that when I started out with working with diversity, equity, inclusion, that was not a popular thing to start to talk about either. So I'm with you there. But if we look at the social factors, because when I talk to my customers who want, and I can, and I'm not bragging here, and this is not to kind of say, okay, my customers are really, really good, but they are good. They want to do this. They want to work correctly with diversity, equity, and inclusion. They want to drive this agenda forward. But I think what we hear also is some kind of concern around the social factors that, okay, what do we have to report on? What activities do we have to take in? When is it good? So what is the focus? If we just look at the overall focus in the Danish business society on social factors, are anybody working with social factors?
Yes, they are, but they need a new language for how they're working with it, because in the ESG, there is some new measurements and a lot of the SMEs can choose. There's some optional, but it will be, of course, customer driven. The big companies are going to have some measurements they want to have from their supply chain.
Yeah.
But they have to make some essential strategies about how do we want to run this company being sustainable and responsible. So not just being a compliance task, but also being a task where they have to define themselves in a new way, saying what kind of company do we want to be in, so we can meet the future in the way that we can have our market, the same market, our customers, keep our big customers, and as well have a good supply chain for ourselves. Yeah.
So what you're basically saying is that a lot of this is a supply chain driven focus right now, where the regulation goes on in the supply chain.
Yes, of course, because the supply chain, the small companies are not going to be hit by any law in the next coming years.
No.
It will be customer driven from the big companies who has their strategies. They have a lot of consultants helping them, and they're just sending this downwards in their value chain. And it's in my opinion, is the big problem, because it's just dripping down to the smaller companies in the value chain who doesn't know how to deal with it and doesn't have all the consultancies that they have in the big and the large companies. They have been working with this for many years. In many of the small companies, they just started.
Okay, so you talk about this, I like trickle down effects when they actually work. I know Ronald Reagan tried with the economics back in the 80s in the US, and that didn't go so well, but when trickle down actually works, it does have a lot of impact. We also notice when working with diversity and inclusion, it needs to start from top leadership, because they set the culture, they set the tone. So it has to be a trickle down effect from that. But what you're basically saying right now is that the larger companies, I just saw, if anybody saw Apple's latest brand video about the sustainability reporting, if you haven't seen it, go see it. Mother Earth comes to do an audit check. It's absolutely amazing branding, but that's another thing. But if we look at a company like Apple, who just released that sustainability video, what you're basically saying is that their work with the ESGs, and thereby also the social factors, is being pushed down in the supply chain. So they're not actually the ones doing the work, but they're pushing it down to small, medium-sized companies who don't have a framework, who don't have consultancies to fix this. Is that basically what I'm hearing?
Yes, it is. And sometimes the CEO of the smaller companies doesn't know anything about this, except that it has to be numbers that they have to deliver to their big customers. Yeah. So it is a numbers game right now in many companies. And that is also a big problem right now, because it's numbers is a good thing. Data is a good thing if it drives changes. But if data is just data and it's just a compliance task, then it doesn't do anything good for the company except being an extra task for them to handle.
Wow. Okay, so that is, but okay. That kind of upsets me a bit. And let me know, anybody in the chat, if that upsets you too, because I didn't actually. So in your perspective, and now we're just again talking overall ESGs, because yes, social factors and diversity and inclusion is part of the ESGs. Let's dive more into that, but let's talk overall. What should the big companies do? What kind of activities do we actually need to see?
They need to reduce the framework so it can be understandable for the smaller companies. And they have to force the smaller companies into making this into a strategy on how they want to be a company. What is their core values on the E part, on the S dimension, and on G? How will they work with it the next 5 or 10 years? That will be a much more value for the smaller companies forcing a change, the change we need and we want to as a whole community.
Instead of just having a supply chain reporting scheme going out as a compliance part.
Yes, and now it's a lucrative market for everybody who is selling software as a quick fix solution for just reporting data. Yeah. So it's just data for the data. So they can report to the bigger companies and just say, this is it. They don't understand that the data also has to move. You have to improve on the data you are delivering. Yeah. So that's the next big problem. When you have made the first documentation, then you just have to work with it. And it's not just a steady numbers. You can just keep on reporting year after year.
But let's then, what you're saying there, let's turn the eye now to diversity and inclusion. And I think everybody who knows Diversity Factor knows that we work with diversity and inclusion from an intersectional perspective. So, aka, it's not just about white ladies in top leadership and board rooms. There's nothing wrong with the white ladies in top leadership and boardrooms. I am one myself, it's not that, but diversity is a lot more. It's multidimensional. There's different diversity parameters to us, primary, secondary, and so forth. So when I am posing these questions, dear listeners, bear with me, because hopefully you do know that this is an intersectional lens that we do have on everything that we do. But in Denmark, just Anne, we have had a legislative law in many, many, many years saying that companies in a certain accounting class have to report on the gender representation in board level and C-level. And they also have to put up goals in order to improve it. And I think we have had this legislation since, I don't know, 2012 or 2013. And there's 2 female CEOs in the top 25 listed companies, most traded listed companies on the Danish stock. It's more common to be named Lars or Peter in Denmark than it is to be a female CEO. So nothing has happened with that legislation.
Nope.
So is the ESG just not another step in that route if we don't have sanctions? Because as you say, yes, there can be a big reporting scheme. We can have a lot of software. If anybody ever worked in sustainability where you were part of the UN Global Compact, you know the reporting scheme around these. Dire, it requires at least 2 full-time employees sometimes if you're a big corporation. So can this actually work?
Yeah, it can if it becomes a strategy and if it becomes one of the company's core value that they want to have diversity in their management team. But if it doesn't, then it's just compliance, and then you can just say, there's not relevant candidates. We couldn't recruit any women to sit in our board. We couldn't blah blah blah, as many companies do now. So the biggest sanctions for the SMEs, which I'm working with, is the economical sanctions, that the big companies don't choose them as a part of their value chain anymore. But I don't think it will go to that on the social part.
Why not? Okay, why? Why is that? What makes you say that?
Because I think that right now the E is taking a good part of the spotlight, and the S is the secondary. It's coming. On behind. And now there's a lot of work to be done on the E part still. A lot of people think we are way ahead, especially in Denmark, but in my opinion, we are not. We are ahead by making numbers, but by making the numbers change, having the change we need, having a more innovation, new solutions, we are far, far, far behind what we think we are. So until the E part is in place, my fear is that the S will be still some nice to, not need to. And that's why I start this presentation very shortly by saying the E, S, and G is combined. You cannot work with one instead of the other if it is a strategy.
Yeah.
But if it's not a strategy, if it's a compliance task, then you can work separately with the E, S, and the G.
Yeah, and then you just have somebody sitting in compliance doing this work, where when you work strategically with diversity and inclusion, it's the top of mind. But when you work with it internally on your workforce, it's top of mind, at least in the HR department, but also with top leadership. But also in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we work with 3 circles of impact, if you can say it like that. You look at the first one, which is your workforce, your internal structures, your recruitment, your onboarding, your retention, your learning and development, and so forth. Is that those structures, are they equitable? Do you have an inclusive culture? Do you have inclusive leadership, and so forth? And how is your representation throughout different sectors and leadership positions beyond gender? But you can also work with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the market. So one thing is your own corporate brand. Is that representative of the society in which you operate in? I see a lot of white, heteronormative, heterosexual corporate brands, if I'm speaking frankly, both for business to business and business to consumer companies. It's a lot of whiteness, and it's a lot of nuclear families showing up on these pages. So that is a different thing. And the market part also goes to your vendors. So as you say, setting requirements to your vendors. And I know some of the big corporations in Denmark have somewhat ambitious target settings on vendors, where you have, if you are what's that called? High-level vendor to a certain company, that you have to report on your D&I. But then it becomes reporting. And then lastly, but not leastly, you can work with the community. So where do you source from in your community? How do you support underrepresented groups in your community, and so forth? Now, when I look across the D&I field, no company have as such moving into the market. We're still paddling around in the workforce. And
yes.
And we're still paddling a bit, as you say, between NICE, where it's just reporting on certain representation targets, and then NEED, where it's more strategical ambition. But what I am seeing is a hard task in moving those representation numbers from the ambition to actually then seeing a change in, for example, top leadership level, where I still don't see that many women. I don't see color, I don't see different sexualities, and so forth. So if you look at social factors, and as you say, these are intertwined with the, you can't work with the E, you can't work with the G without working with the S. It's all intertwined. Where would you say that companies need to start in order? One thing is the strategy and so forth, I get that, but what kind of activities can we actually take in our value chain, in our social factors? What kind of programs, activities can we do?
For first, you have to be very enlightened on how changes are made in companies, and how you have made successful changes before in your company. Yep. Because 70% of all change process in companies fail. So it's a bit depressing statistics when you have to go into the S dimension of the ESG. But if you look in your own company and see how have you made some successful changes in the past, and how can we make it in the present? Because every company is different. There is a lot of things there is the same, but the culture is different in each company. Yeah. So you have to look in and see how are we working? When are we successful? Is it when it's top driven? Is it the CEO who has to be in charge and just pulling the change all the way? Do you have to have people coming from as consultants as me to help us with the process? Do we have to buy some software? Do we have to be a part of programs? Do we have to do something that can drive the change in our company? A lot of companies think they can do it themselves. But I think that's partly why 70% of all change process fail. It's because we think we can do it ourselves, and then you get the new next order in, and it's very big, and everybody's on board. We have to fix this, and we forget all about the change we are in making. So I think that's the best place to start. Then you can look for different programs and people who are making it easy for companies to start and look there. But I think it's crucial that you look at yourself as a leader and as a CEO of a company, and you look on which change processes has been a success since you started being a leader in this company.
I think that's very, very sound advice. I know that we all kind of in some shape or form would really, really appreciate you giving us, hey, and give me a checklist. Where do I start? Let me check this off. Let me check that off. But looking to previous decisions and taking in that learning and debriefing on that learning and saying, okay, how can we use that learning and what was good and what was bad, and then rolling with that with any activity that we want to implement in our organization is actually, please note this down, people, because that is actually very, very sound advice. And I think that is one of the things we often miss when we are working with transformation process. We see it in D&I also. We think companies think they can go in and then they can roll out, for example, now we all have to celebrate Pride, and then they do it for 1 week and then nothing happens after that. And they're like, why aren't our people committed? Yeah, because maybe this is a process that doesn't work with your people. What has worked previously, as you said, what worked well and what didn't work. Or they do inclusive leadership training, but they don't onboard their employees in that training. So that's also another step. Or they don't onboard their HR partners in order to support. What has worked before? I think that is really, really good. So what does bad look like? If you have to start out right, and you start out by actually learning from your past decisions and moving from that on and past change transformation processes, what does bad then look like? What do you not do?
Bad, you do not buy something easy, quick fix software and think this will make everything go away. You do not focus only on data as a compliance task in your company. You continue to work and improve, and you set some goals you want to achieve because you want to be this company. You want to be this for your employees. You want to make these, everything around your employees has to be driven because you find it relevant for your employees, not because the neighbor company is doing something and it sounds nice and it went very quick. So it has to be driven from the inside. And I know that a lot of, I said it was customer driven, that it's just dripping down from the large companies. But then you just have to make the translation. You have to make it easier on yourself. You have to have the goals that is defined by you, and then you can deliver the data that they need. Yeah. I think that's very crucial. Yeah. And sometimes when I go out in companies, they think we need to have some help on the whole agenda because every customer is asking for CO2 emissions. But all of the employees, a lot of employees has left this company. They cannot hire the new people, and this is where we have to start. You can not be a company with an excellent CO2 accountability, but no employees making the products.
Nope. No. Do you see? So you said that the E was the prime focus right now, and yes, they're intertwined, but it's much, much easier just for a company to focus on one thing, and I get why they're focused on the E. What do you see that big companies are asking for when they want smaller companies like your clients to report on when it has to do with social factors? What are kind of the three big major themes right now when it comes to social factors?
Yeah, it is sick days.
Wow.
A bit boring in this practice, I think. Yeah, it is. It's sick days, and it's how many employees they hire from directly from another company, or how many they hire when they're unemployed. And then it's about education. How many gets education
internally
in a year?
In a year. Yeah. So that is the three main themes right now in social factors.
Yes.
Okay, that kind of startles me a bit.
Yeah, it's only my experience, and I know a lot of the companies is probably other, but for the companies I'm working with, it's primarily those three things.
Okay, that's insane in some shape or form, because I would have imagined that at least in some shape or form they would have asked to, for example, gender representation in some in at least board level or top leadership level.
No, they haven't heard of it.
Never heard of it.
No.
Okay, people, you need to step up. This is a great way to kind of drive change. This is, you are those of you who are sitting in big corporations, you need to ask your vendors to this, and it will have more work. That is one thing, but the second thing is that would actually start to put this on at least the mind board, that this is something that we need to pay attention to. Again, as Anna said, it can't just be a reporting scheme. It has to be more than that. It has to be more than compliance. It has to be involved in your strategy. But if you look at the companies, Anne, who are doing good, if you could globally, if you just look outside the world, who would you highlight if we just look at social factors, who are actually setting the bar really, really high? Are there anybody?
Yeah, it is the companies who are very new, who are born with these values. They are doing very, very good.
Yeah.
But for all companies who has been driven like this who has been led this way for like 150 years, it's a big cultural change in how you are seeing your company, how you're doing your own leadership, how you are building your company. Yeah. So I think that is the tough part, because a lot of the new companies are just hitting it off, and they're having lots of good numbers and cases and everything they could share around. But some of the old companies who have been driven very well, they're very good companies. They earn a lot of money, so they're very good at what they do. That is the big challenge, because they're good at what they do. So why change it?
Yeah, that's never fun. Change is never fun. However, it's often the only thing constant. I totally get that.
But a necessary change for them until somebody says you have to do it, because they have a good run company.
We are
so the board is satisfied, and the CEOs are satisfied. So why bother?
Yeah. But we are, for example, with social factors, seeing out of the EU coming a pay transparency directive, that you have pay equity, specifically target on gender pay equity, but that you have to be transparent about pay gaps, you have to lock them in under 5% and so forth. And that is clear regulations coming out of the EU. And as I understand the legislation, there will be sanctions, there will be fines, there will be money to pay if you don't do anything about it. Do you think this is a legislation that will help move the market in terms of social factors, or will it just become another compliance thing?
That's a tough one to answer, I think, because of course it will have an effect, I think. But you can just mention GDPR and just drew some parallels to that. See how many companies are compliant with GDPR. All the big companies are, but a lot of the small companies say they are, but they're not. If you go in digging, they're not. But they know what to write on their website. They know how to look like it when they're having the website and on social media and others, but they're not compliant with the GDPR.
In terms of how they handle internal data on their employees. That is probably also a thing that you have to start paying attention to within social factors, right? The GDPR. Now I'm just jumping into that because you mentioned the GDPR, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's not the radar. Nobody's looking that way. But it will be.
It will be.
Definitely.
Okay. So if you are starting out tomorrow, you mentioned making this a part of the strategy, but now you're sitting in a big old company who has been doing this forever. You're not a startup. You can't, I totally get the new company thing that you're saying, because we often say that startups has this clear runway to kind of implement D&I from the get-go. They have the runway to make sure that their structures are equitable. They have the runway to make sure that the culture is built on inclusive values and so forth. And they can set their management teams much easier, filled with gender representation, nationality representation, and so forth. So they do have a runway. But now you're in Big old company, you've been in the market for 100 years, you're making money, the shareholders are happy, and Friedman said to you back in 1985 that the only responsibility you have is to make money for your shareholders. Where do you start?
My best advice for many companies is to ask their 5 biggest customers on what is going to happen on the ESG, what is the demands they're going to give them in a year's time, and then you can just get calculating backwards and just making your strategy. So you don't get off on a too high a note, and the company cannot be a part of the change because it's too big to begin with.
Yeah.
But you can also just apply to your customers' demands at the time that you have to. And that's absolutely crucial for the SMEs.
Yeah, that hereby that tip is given on to everybody who works actually with DEI in some shape or form. Because yes, if you are looking to work with social factors in your DEI work, go ask your 5 biggest clients, customers, on what their perception is on this and what they will focus on in social factors, and then start pushing in on that. Now, I know a lot of, for you working with diversity, equity, and inclusion, this also has to do with the employee and AKA also potential employees. But I know, and I don't know how much you know about this, but there is a lot of research going on about what the new generation wants in a workplace setting, and which demands they are posing to their employer. And is this something that you also sensing in the market, that this pursuit of brains and manpower, that the ESG is actually also in demand with the new generation of potential employees?
Yeah, and this is where it's combined again, because the younger generations, they want the core values of a company, not just some nice paperwork on a website. They want to feel the core companies, and they want to work with something that makes value in the world. Yeah. They want to be a part of change, and they want to be a part of companies that are able to make changes, that are not just going on like they have done it for the last 150 years and just shifted from generation to generation. So they want to be a part of companies who are able to make the change when they have to, and also with a little bit of philanthropy thoughts in where they want to be.
Yeah. And I don't know for anybody on the call, if you ever do, for example, focus groups with your own internal employees on your values, on your purpose, on your strategy in terms of where you are heading towards the ESGs. Now, I know a lot of you do engagement surveys. That's all well and good. But do you really invite your employees into that co-creation process on where they would like to see the company going? For a lot of big corporations, this is something that is secluded into a boardroom and a strategy seminar for the top leadership and C-level and the board. But your people are your, and I hate this term actually, because I'm gonna say your greatest assets, but they're not steel construction, so they're not an asset. But your people are the ones driving your company forward. As Anne said, you can't do net zero emissions if you don't have any workforce to do it by. So are you actually going in and doing focus groups, asking on them where they want to drive the values and the ESG forward, listening to them beyond an employee resource group? That is a trick also to kind of get working with the ESG or the social factors, besides just asking your 5 biggest clients. Now, and I don't know how much you know about this, but what if you're a business to consumer company? How much is this playing a role in when I stand in the supermarket and I make a buying decision about milk or about groceries or vegetables or whatever it is I do? I have to tell you, I'm not the most political conscious consumer, so I'm probably not your target group. But is this actually playing a role?
Yes, for the younger generations it is. So yeah. It's only us, the older people, who are a little bit tough to handle. Yes. Price is still absolutely crucial, and every time something happens in the world, inflation or everything else, then a lot of social responsibility and also on the whole environmental part it's going downhill. It's not that important. We have seen that in Denmark under this inflation we have just been through. So a lot of so I think the B2C customers, it depends on how who are your customers, and are you trying to get in touch with the young people? So or how are you doing it?
Yeah. And I'm running a bit out of questions, and we're also zooming in on the hour. So I wanna ask two questions. First of all, is there something I forgot to ask you that you're really dying to tell? Is there something, what that key message that you're like, Helene, why didn't you ask me this? Then tell me.
No, I mean, it was not because you were missing the question, but there's something I would like to say, and it is that it is good business to be a responsible business. And this is what we have to show the companies out there who are not getting started yet. It is good business. You can make it good business, but you have to have some clear business models on how, if you spend money on developing this, if you spend money on making this change, what will you get in return in your workforce or financially? And I think that is for us consultants also to be a little bit clear about what is the business case in these changes. Because if it's just a change because you need to, or just because it's a change because it's the right thing to do, then it will take a much longer time. But if you can see a clear business case on why you should do this to protect and to develop your company so it can look into the future, then it's much easier to get the CEO level and the board getting into it. This is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with that. And to turn that into D&I words and so forth, and the thread towards that. And I think a lot of you on this call knows this, that if this is not something that is implemented in the way you do business, you're gonna be that lonely D&I professional who needs a team to unload with, because you're gonna drive this work yourself throughout an organization, and that is way too hard. So you need it integrated into the business strategy, and you do that by the business case. And I know there has been a lot of talk in the D&I field, and just so you know, that the business case, we're done with that. We don't want to argue this anymore with the business case, because this is basically the right thing to do. But you don't have to present the McKinsey's number on our performance and so forth, because that doesn't have to be the business case. The business case is also just the fact that if you, for example, ensure an inclusive workplace where sick days go down, aka you can report to your customers that sick days are down, where you pay people equally and equitable, you will often have a better performing workforce who are then able to solve those issues at hand when we talk, for example, about the environmental part of the ESG. And that is the business case. AKA the business case is basically saying to your leadership, it's good business to have an environment where people are actually treated fairly, and where we recognize that there have been historical and still are cultural discrimination that we need to take into account when we are planning for making an inclusive environment for our workforce. Yes, I totally agree with that. That
the business case can also innovation by having and including if you're recruiting other profiles than you normally do, then you can hire the level of innovation in your company, and that you can also measure on if you want data on it. So the business case can be many things, but doing the same way and expecting something new is not a formula for anything good happening in the future. Because nothing will change in your company if you're trying to expect some new results by doing what you've always done.
Thank you, Anne. We are, I can see people are dropping a bit off the call, but Valdemar have a question. So let me just pop that out here in the chat. How do you avoid making homogeneous top management teams feel threatened by the social factors agenda? There's more. If we want top managers to be role models and true leaders of the social factors agenda to inspire the rest of the company, it could mean that they need to make changes to their own management team to diversify and increase representation. In turn, this might feel threatening since some of the managers themselves might need to be replaced, change position, move to open a headcount slot for other managers that can increase diversity. The common conundrum to this, the uncomfortable solutions or the uncomfortable decisions. Thanks, Valdemar, for posing this question. And does it make sense to you? Because I'm totally down with this, but
definitely. And all changes are difficult and frightening for everybody. It's the psychology of changes. We don't like changes. Our old brains don't like changes. And if you're a CEO or a management team in a company, bringing a female or different sexualities in your leadership room can be very frightening, because what does it have to do with me, and how does it make my position change if we invite people in we don't know? It's actually the same when you come as a consultant into a company. A lot of CEOs and a lot of managements in the management team are quite frightened often when you come, because they find that you know a lot of things that they don't know. So they're finding themselves a little bit incompetent in what we are coming with. And I think it's the same scare we have to work with. And I think we can do it mostly by sharing the good stories, sharing the values of what they bring in other companies, how they have made it successfully, and just have some storytelling about how this danger is not there. It's only in our minds because it's something new.
I totally agree with that, Anne. And Valdemar, then I'm also going to add the fact that representation work, when we talk about DEI and when we talk about social factors, is uncomfortable work, because at the end of the day, somebody will potentially lose a seat that they have been privileged towards because of their gender, because of their race, because of their sexuality. And I think as D&I professionals, that is one thing, but also for people working strategically with the social factors, that is also an uncomfortable conversation that we need to have, and that we need to allow a space for, to say, for example, to top leaderships, yes, you can expand the table to include 16 seats, for example, but you're going to have a hard time, dear CEO, of 15 direct reports. So that is probably a poor management decision choice, or you can start redesigning the table. So basically looking at, okay, why is it that we continuously hire the same people in those top leadership positions? How can we make the rules for that table different? How can we make the rules for that table more inclusive, more equitable? One of the things that works with that is, as Anne says, the good stories, the role modelings, the curiosity that drives down this, or curiosity is a great way to block change resistance. It opens people's mind up. But you also have to make space for that uncomfortable decision that somebody who thought that they had the right to that seat at the table, because they always historically had that right, no longer has it. It's a different table. And that's a challenging conversation. And I think that's the most challenging conversation that top leaders need to have when working with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those leaders who actually go into that conversation with their head held high, those are the ambitious one when it comes to D&I work. You can kind of...
Yeah, and it's also about CEO is inviting other people in who has different perspectives.
Yeah.
And be able to be in the discussion with the different perspective. I see it as a startup with a lot of startups who are just out finding people for their advisory board. Yeah. And they are finding people from their own network, from their family, from a next door neighbor. And it doesn't make any challenges for the CEO or the founder of the startups. And you have to invite people in who are making you better, who are challenging you, and who dare to ask you the questions that are a little bit difficult, but also a little bit scary and frightening to be asked.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we want to be the stupid person in the room, actually. Think about that, because if you're the stupidest person in the room, That is actually a really, really great room to probably be in. So every CEO should kind of put that behind. Now, if there are no more questions, and there is not as such, and I'm gonna kick this out, off, or not kick it off, but close it down, as you say. And thank you for coming on this hour with us here at the D&I Lab Talk. As again, we will push this out, the recording out on our YouTube channel. Everybody who signed up for the event will get a link so you can watch it. Hopefully, fingers crossed, tomorrow. So you can go back and you can share it with other people in your organization, or if there is a point that you want to really see again, then you can track that down also. But from here on out, I just want to say thank you, and especially to you, Anne. Thanks for joining on this call. Any famous last words?
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. I hope you will hook up with me on LinkedIn, or just let me know. I'm writing a book about the social dimension in the ESG, and I'm going out getting a lot of inputs from a lot of people. So I also hope that many of the listeners here could be interested in that.
Absolutely.
But thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Anne. And to everybody else on the call, thank you. Have a lovely Thursday afternoon. I hope you enjoy the sun if it's out where you are out. But thanks you for coming on. Bye.